Beneath the noise of history lies another war, one fought in shadows, buried in sealed crates and erased from the ledgers. Its traces are measured not in battles, but in silences, in the missing hours of a radiolog, the train that never arrived, the coordinates that lead nowhere. Follow them too far, and you'll find yourself standing at the edge of something built to remain unseen, and meant to stay that way. On the morning of April 17, 1945, the freight yards at Silesia's Gorlice station were nearly deserted. Berlin was crumbling under Soviet artillery, the Oder line had collapsed, and the remnants of the Wehrmacht were in full retreat. Yet one train, a 14-car formation of mismatched freight wagons and a single armored locomotive, was being loaded under the direct supervision of SS Sturmbannführer Emil Kruger, a man known to Allied intelligence for his work on experimental weapons programs. The cargo was unlike the usual shipments of looted valuables or troop movements. Surviving loading manifests, recovered decades later from fragmentary Reichsbahn records, refer to Geradkissen, Morgenlicht, equipment crates, Morgenlicht. These crates, according to two railway workers later interrogated by Polish security services, contained cylindrical steel housings, precision lenses, and unfamiliar electrical assemblies marked with the insignia of the Reichsluftfahrtministerium's Forschungsamt. Several were stenciled with the initials HKP, a designation Allied analysts believe referred to Hochfrequenzkraft Project, or High Frequency Power Project. The locomotive, an armored BR-52 Kriegslok with reinforced boiler plating, departed Gorlice at 4:12 under the cover of early morning mist. Its intended route was south, through Zittau and across the Bohemian border, ultimately toward the Austrian Alps. This route made little strategic sense given the encirclement of Central Europe by Soviet and American forces, but intelligence intercepts suggest that a fallback facility, codenamed Edelweiss III, had been prepared somewhere in the Salzkammergut region to store sensitive material. The first sign that something went wrong came from Soviet advance elements of the 7th Guards Mechanized Corps. In a post-war debriefing, Lieutenant Mikhail Varenkov recalled his unit encountering the train's wrecked rearguard escort near Hirschberg, present-day Jelenia Gora. The SS troops had been shot through, clean execution shots, no scavenging, Varenkov told interrogators in 1961. We saw the rails torn up ahead, but no locomotive, no cars. Only crates broken open, empty. His testimony was buried in GRU files until partial declassification in 1992. The Soviet account conflicted with British SIGINT. An Enigma decrypt from the same day, intercepted by Bletchley Park's Hut 6, recorded a Luftwaffe transmission reporting that Transport Morgenlicht has cleared Sector Grun without incident. Estimated arrival Edelweiss III at 1800 hours. Yet there is no record of the train ever reaching any Austrian station. U.S. counterintelligence core files from occupied Salzburg note only that an empty spur at the supposed Edelweiss site had been recently used, with fresh ash in the stove of a guardhouse and vehicle tracks leading into the forest. Rumors surrounding the disappearance took hold in the 1950s when a Polish railway inspector, Janusz Malech, claimed to have seen an abandoned locomotive deep in a disused tunnel near the Czech border in 1947. His statement, taken by the Ministry of Public Security, was suppressed, and Malech later recanted under unclear circumstances. No such tunnel appears on Reichsbahn engineering maps from the era, yet aerial photographs from a 1954 U.S. Air Force reconnaissance flight reveal a collapsed hillside matching Malech's description. Theories about the fate of the train are divided into three main camps. The first posits that the Soviets intercepted it intact and moved the cargo east under extreme secrecy, possibly to the Missile Research Center at Sverdlovsk, 45. This is supported by a 1962 GRU training memo referencing the Silesian optical assemblies as part of high-frequency radar countermeasure development. However, no surviving Soviet equipment bears serial numbers matching those on partial Morgenlicht shipping tags recovered from Gorlice. The second theory holds that the train never crossed into Czechoslovakia, instead diverting onto a private industrial spur owned by the Krupp conglomerate, whose factories in the region maintained deep subterranean storage. A former Krupp engineer, interviewed anonymously in Hamburg in 1974, claimed that experimental aerial defense components were hidden in an unregistered mine shaft and retrieved by foreign agents in the early Cold War. no corroborating documents have surfaced. The third, more conspiratorial theory, advanced in the 1980s by independent researchers, suggests that the train was deliberately destroyed in a controlled demolition to prevent capture, possibly by its own SS escort. This is based on a cryptic diary entry found in the effects of SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Weiss, which reads, *Morgenlicht set, better in ash than in Bolshevik hands. No remains of the train have been found to substantiate this claim. Attempts to investigate in the 1990s were hampered by missing records. The Bundesarchiv lists the entire April 1945 Gorlitz freight manifest ledger as lost due to water damage, while the Russian State Military Archive denies holding any GRU files on the incident. Freedom of information requests in the U.S. have yielded only heavily redacted CIA memoranda from 1951 referring to recovered Morgenlicht subcomponents undergoing analysis at a domestic contractor facility. In 2008, Polish spelunkers exploring a sealed wartime railway tunnel near Wałbrzych reported finding fragments of corroded steel plating with Reichsbahn serial stamps from the same production batch as the Gorlitz locomotive. Within weeks, the tunnel was sealed by the Ministry of Culture, citing structural instability. No official report was released. To this day, no complete inventory of Projekt Morgenlicht has been compiled, and its purpose remains speculative. Surviving technical sketches suggest a combination of advanced infrared optics, parabolic reflectors, and high-voltage transmission assemblies. Historians who have reviewed these fragments speculate they could have been part of a directed energy weapon prototype, possibly an anti-aircraft blinding system. The last known person to speak publicly about the train was Erich Reiner, a former SS telegraph operator, who in a 1985 interview said simply, "It was meant to go south. But orders changed. After that, I heard only one word on the line. Verschwunden. Gone." The disappearance of the Silesian train stands as one of the few wartime incidents where all three major post-war intelligence powers, Soviet, American, and British, maintain unexplained gaps in their archives. Whether it was captured, destroyed, or hidden away in some forgotten tunnel, the fact remains. In the chaos of April 1945, a train carrying technology potentially decades ahead of its time left Gorlitz, and was never seen again. In June 1946, 9 months after the official end of hostilities in Europe, a joint Anglo-French survey team entered a disused quarry complex outside Saint-Riquier, in the Somme department. The tunnels, stretching for kilometers under the chalky hills, had served various military purposes since the First World War. The Wehrmacht had converted them into a fortified command post in late 1943, complete with armored blast doors, independent power generation, and an underground radio suite. The initial purpose of the survey was logistical, cataloging abandoned German installations for demolition or reclamation. But as the lead engineer, Captain Gerald Woodhouse of the Royal Engineers, later wrote in an internal memorandum, the site retained an appearance of sudden abandonment, as though operations ceased mid-command. Inside, the team found wooden field desks still arranged in operational clusters, map cases left open, and a scattering of teleprinter ribbons curled on the floor. The maps presented the first anomaly. Most were routine topographical charts of northern France and Belgium, marked with typical Wehrmacht grid references. But several large sheets, charred at the edges and brittle from heat, bore notations in an unfamiliar mix of German and truncated Russian. These indicated terrain features and coordinates that did not correspond to any known European location. Captain Woodhouse had the documents sealed and dispatched to SHAEF headquarters in Frankfurt. The second anomaly was a radio logbook, the last entry of which was time-stamped 2/17, February 12, 1945. The log ends mid-sentence, in the middle of a cipher group. The receiving call sign is listed as Eisfuches 1, a designation not found in any Allied intercept catalogs. According to an MI6 internal review in 1952, the cipher group could not be matched to any known German encryption system, including Enigma variants. The largest mystery, however, lay inside a welded-shut armored safe bolted to the wall of the command center. Given the unstable condition of the tunnels and the risk of explosive traps, the safe was left in situ, marked for later recovery. That later did not come until 1965, when the site was briefly re-entered under NATO supervision during an unrelated French army training exercise. By then, the limestone roof over the safe's alcove had partially collapsed, making its extraction hazardous. Nevertheless, with oxyacetylene torches and a makeshift hoist, the container was removed. When the safe was opened at SHAPE headquarters in Casteau, Belgium, its contents stunned the reviewing officers. Inside were 10 cylindrical canisters, each containing rolls of high-resolution aerial reconnaissance film. The film stock bore wartime AGFA markings but had been processed in a laboratory that could not be traced to any known Luftwaffe facility. The images themselves were sharp and meticulously indexed, but they depicted landscapes unrecognizable to any of the reviewing cartographers. The terrain in the photographs appeared barren, wind-scoured, and riddled with vast craters, some nearly a kilometer across. Several images showed straight, ruler-true lines etched into the ground, as if carved by colossal machinery. No settlements, roads, or vegetation were visible. The sky in many frames had a washed-out pallor, with low horizons and unusual atmospheric haze. The official classification assigned to the find was NATO Cosmic Top Secret. Publicly, the photographs were logged as miscellaneous archival materials of no operational significance and transferred to a secure vault in Brussels. Only a handful of officers, mostly within the NATO Intelligence Fusion Branch, knew the true nature of the images. No attempt to release them to civilian authorities or scientific institutions was recorded. Declassified scraps from a 1971 NATO briefing reference an analysis effort codenamed Operation Black Terrain. These documents, fragmentary and heavily redacted, suggest the photographs were cross-compared with Allied and Soviet reconnaissance archives. The conclusion, if any, was never committed to the surviving record. In 1973, the Belgian Air Component quietly requested, without explanation, enhanced long-range aerial mapping over several remote Arctic sectors. The connection to the quarry discovery was never officially stated. Rumors persist among retired RAF photo interpreters that the landscapes in the film bear striking resemblance to areas of northern Canada and Greenland subjected to classified nuclear testing surveys in the 1950s. Others maintain the photographs were of locations outside Earth entirely, an interpretation dismissed by professional historians but stubbornly repeated in intelligence folklore. Why the Wehrmacht command post had such material remains unresolved. One theory, favored by certain French military archivists, is that the images were part of a German attempt to model terrain for experimental ballistic targeting, possibly linked to V-2 successor programs. A second theory posits that the photographs were copies stolen from Soviet aerial mapping projects in Siberia, repurposed for German intelligence analysis. The most unsettling speculation, rarely voiced in official circles, is that the photographs were taken by German aircraft or devices operating from undisclosed locations late in the war, places never acknowledged in Allied or Axis records. As for the quarry itself, the site was sealed in 1968 after a collapse killed 2 maintenance workers. Its precise coordinates were omitted from public maps, and the entrance was backfilled under the pretense of public safety. No further authorized entry has been recorded. The burned maps and the silent radiolog remain in the classified annex of the Bundesarchiv Militararchiv in Freiburg, catalogued only by accession numbers and without descriptive titles. Requests to view them are routinely denied on grounds of national security interest, despite the wartime events being over 7 decades old. In the absence of full disclosure, the St. Riquier tunnels and the mysterious aerial films have become an enduring Cold War shadow, an intersection of 2 wars, where the fading embers of the Second World War briefly illuminated a secret so inconvenient that NATO, the Bundeswehr, and the French Ministry of Defense all agreed on the same course of action: silence. On October 4, 1949, a small detachment from the U.S. Army's 373rd Engineer Combat Battalion landed by ski-equipped C-47 on an uncharted ridge of Greenland's northeast ice sheet. Their mission, officially logged as Arctic Hazard Survey, had been prompted by an aerial sighting from a USAF reconnaissance flight, what appeared to be the remains of a prefabricated structure poking through wind-scoured snow. The coordinates placed it nearly 200 miles from the nearest known wartime installations. The site, once excavated, revealed the weathered skeleton of a German Wetterfunkturmat station, similar to the automatic meteorological outposts the Kriegsmarine had deployed in remote Arctic regions during the war. However, unlike other stations, this one bore signs of prolonged human habitation: a reinforced shelter, rusted cooking equipment, and a dormant shortwave transmitter still wired to a buried antenna mast. The presence of German equipment was not unexpected. Allied forces had documented several such installations in Greenland during 1944, but the discovery of a sealed steel cylinder within the shelter's flooring altered the nature of the mission. The cylinder, 78 centimeters long and hermetically welded, was painted in a dull gray anti-corrosion coating and stamped with the designation MWSTN. Thulier 7/45. Inside were tightly rolled sheets of oiled paper, thousands of pages of handwritten meteorological data. At first glance, the logs appeared to be standard barometric, wind, and temperature records. But closer inspection revealed they were written in an elaborate numeric cipher, with occasional German words embedded among the digits. More troubling was the dating. The first entries corresponded to known German Arctic station records from early 1945. Yet the logs continued without interruption through August, September, and even into November 1945, months after the Reich's unconditional surrender. The material was immediately flown to Fort Belvoir for cryptanalysis under the Army Security Agency. Despite the urgency, no progress was made in breaking the cipher, which seemed to shift unpredictably between numeric keys. In 1951, the logs were transferred to the Armed Forces Security Agency, precursor to the NSA, where an internal memorandum noted possible dual encoding with environmental masking variables. By 1957, fragments of the cipher had been broken. The partially decrypted text contained references to Phase II, Phase II, and Corridor Nord, Northern Corridors. One translated line read, *, corridor be fully stable, transit possible without exposure above 40 seconds. Another mentioned, assembly to commence upon confirmation of haven coordinates. No context was given, and the meteorological readings, though genuine, appeared to be serving as a cover for these operational notes. The documents were reclassified Eyes Only and filed under a new code name, Operation Frost Index. Theories among analysts ranged from clandestine German exfiltration routes to Soviet exploitation of wartime infrastructure. Several suggested that corridors referred to navigable channels under the polar ice, potentially accessible to submarines or specialized craft. In 1963, an NSA summary briefed to the Joint Chiefs recommended further reconnaissance of polar subsurface anomalies. This coincided with a classified U.S. Navy project using under-ice sonar mapping in sectors of the Arctic previously considered inaccessible. Whether these efforts confirmed any of the corridors mentioned in the logs remains unknown. The sonar results are still withheld. In 1978, after advances in computational decryption, a fuller translation was completed. The logs described regular transports moving through designated coordinates, along with warnings about interference from magnetic anomalies. No vessel types were specified, but one decrypted entry from October 1945 noted, *, transit to haven completed, cargo intake minimal, await return signal from Sudcourtier. *, the identity of haven has never been established in declassified records. An Air Force briefing memo from 1983, later leaked to investigative journalists, made oblique reference to foreign technology retrieval in Arctic sectors long abandoned by original operators. The phrase has fueled speculation that the cargo mentioned in the logs was not conventional material, though no corroborating evidence has emerged. Officially, the U.S. government maintains that the cylinder contained encrypted meteorological records of negligible significance, and the post-war dating is explained as clerical error or backfilled data. This position has not convinced all historians, particularly given the unusual security surrounding the site. The original weather station was dismantled in 1950, its location erased from maps, and aerial photography of the region restricted for decades. In 2004, Danish polar researchers working in northeast Greenland reported stumbling upon non-Danish metallic debris in an area roughly matching the station's suspected location. Their photographs, never formally authenticated, show riveted steel fragments consistent with 1940s German manufacturing. Within weeks, their research permit was rescinded without explanation. The steel cylinder itself remains in secure storage at Fort Meade. Requests under the Freedom of Information Act have been uniformly denied, with one rejection letter citing potential to compromise current operational capabilities. What remains undisputed is that a German station, still manned and transmitting months after the war's official end, existed in one of the most remote parts of the Arctic. It left behind a cryptic record of movements through hidden polar corridors, movements that someone, somewhere, has spent decades ensuring are never fully explained. When Soviet forces seized Königsberg on April 9, 1945, the Red Army's 11th Guards Army took possession of a vast collection of looted cultural property and administrative archives stored in the city's Schloss complex. Among the crates of paintings, manuscripts, and seized municipal records was one wooden case marked only with a black-painted stencil, Sonderakte 77. The designation, meaning Special File 77, appears nowhere in surviving Wehrmacht or SS record indexes. According to a 1946 Soviet inventory list, declassified in 1991, it contained photographic plates, technical sketches, and multilingual annotations concerning energy apparatus for extreme climate deployment. The description was vague, but a penciled margin note by an NKVD logistics officer added a detail not present in the official summary. Gerät für autark Energieversorgung, Gerät 12, Portable Stromquelle für Langzeitstationen. In English, Device for Autonomous Power Supply, Device 12, Portable Power Source for Long-Term Stations. The case was loaded onto a Soviet convoy train bound for Moscow, but somewhere along its route, the paper trail ends. Subsequent shipping manifests list its crate number as in transit for months, then remove it entirely in later updates. No Soviet ministry or military branch ever confirmed receipt. In 1964, a KGB archivist named Pyotr Kovalchuk defected in Vienna. During his debriefing by Austrian intelligence, Kovalchuk claimed to have handled the original Sonderakte 77 contents during a 1950 internal review. He described the photographs as depicting a cylindrical, mobile power unit mounted on tracked skids, capable, according to attached calculations, of operating for decades without refueling. The documents, he said, included handwritten notes in German, Russian, and Finnish. Kovalchuk further alleged that the file was removed from the archives in 1957 by direct order of the First Chief Directorate and never returned. Official Soviet records dismiss Kovalchuk's account as fabrication by Western services. Yet fragments of corroboration exist. In the Russian State Naval Archive, a single memorandum dated August 1957 refers to long-term polar station sustainment trials in the Kara Sea, using an autonomous thermoelectric apparatus of non-Soviet origin. The trail goes cold until May 1972, when a U.S. Navy aerial reconnaissance mission over the Kola Peninsula recorded a northbound convoy leaving Murmansk. The convoy consisted of 6 MAZ-537 heavy transporters hauling sealed, reinforced containers of identical dimensions, approximately 4 meters long, 2 meters high, with rounded ends. No Soviet unit insignia were visible, and the vehicles traveled under escort of unmarked GAZ-69 trucks. The convoy route, reconstructed from satellite imagery, led toward the Severomorsk 3 airbase, then disappeared from observation. In 1978, Norwegian intelligence obtained a partial log from a merchant vessel moored in Murmansk during the convoy's departure. The ship's first officer noted in his diary, heavy low-frequency vibration from quay area before convoy left. Containers emitted visible vapor in the cold air, though no heating equipment present. The note was passed to NATO's Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, where it was appended to an internal briefing on unattributed Arctic logistical activity. Some historians argue that Sonderakte 77 contained early designs for compact nuclear reactors, possibly acquired by the Germans through independent research or captured foreign technology. If so, the devices could explain both the prolonged secrecy and the strategic interest in Arctic deployment. Others suggest the power units were intended to support remote radar or missile tracking stations in the polar region, enabling operations in otherwise unsustainable environments. No physical evidence of the device has ever been recovered. In 1989, a Finnish geophysical survey team reported anomalous heat readings from an uninhabited island in the Barents Sea, consistent with buried industrial machinery. Within months, the island was declared a restricted military zone by the Soviet Northern Fleet. Following the Soviet collapse, Western researchers attempted to access Russian military archives for references to Sonderakte 77. Requests were denied or returned with the claim that no such file exists. The Bundesarchiv in Germany lists the designation only in its Absent Records Index, with no explanatory note. The last traceable mention appears in a 1994 NATO internal communication summarizing historical anomalies in polar sustainment operations. The relevant section, still heavily redacted, states, logistical profile consistent with relocated autonomous power plant as originally described in defector source K-14, Kovalchuk. Final disposition unknown. No imagery past 1974 available. In the absence of official acknowledgement, the story of Sonderakte 77 has become a footnote in the vast ledger of missing wartime technology. An incident where a wooden crate, lost in the paperwork of an empire in collapse, may have carried the means to power a station at the top of the world for generations. And in 1972, if the aerial photographs are to be believed, it may have been moved once more, this time to a destination that remains beyond the reach of any archive. In early May 1945, as the Wehrmacht dissolved under the weight of Allied advances, a small OSS forward detachment operating in northern Yugoslavia received a tip from local partisans. A Luftwaffe courier aircraft, a Siebel C-204, was expected to land at a rural strip outside Cezana, bound for the port of Trieste. Intelligence suggested it carried dispatches from German scientific personnel in the Alps to the Kriegsmarine. On May 7th, under cloudy skies and worsening crosswinds, the plane descended onto the improvised airstrip. OSS operatives, supported by Yugoslav 9th Corps fighters, intercepted it before takeoff. The crew surrendered without resistance. In the cabin was a locked metal briefcase, heavily scuffed and fitted with a civilian-style keylock. The manifest simply listed private correspondence, signed by an Oberstleutnant Hans Rademacher of the Luftwaffe Research Branch. The briefcase was flown that same night to Bari, Italy, where it was opened under OSS security. Inside were 5 film canisters, each labeled in block Gothic script, Projekt Steinadler, Band IV. A note, written in meticulous Sutherland handwriting, instructed that the reels be delivered to Dr. F. Kessler, Reichenhall Complex, without duplication. When the reels were developed, analysts were confronted with images that immediately defied expectations. The footage, clear, well-composed, and dated between late April and early May 1945, showed what appeared to be a fortified facility high in the Austrian Alps. Snow-dusted ridgelines, concrete blast walls, and multi-level entrances carved into rock dominated the first segments. Subsequent sequences depicted groups of men in mixed uniforms, some in Luftwaffe or Wehrmacht tunics, others in clearly identifiable US and British service dress. The Allied uniformed personnel were not prisoners in the conventional sense. They moved freely within the facility, operating scientific equipment, drafting documents, and conferring with German officers over technical drawings. Several frames show them assembling large, angular metallic structures beneath overhead gantries. In one shot, a whiteboard bears technical schematics annotated in English and German. The footage ends abruptly, with a final scene of a convoy departing the facility under cover of night. The lead vehicle, a darkened Opel Blitz truck, has its license plate obscured with cloth. OSS field reports on the reels were forwarded to Washington under sealed pouch. The official response was terse: retain original. Produce no further prints. Material classified eyes only. Director. Within weeks, the reels were removed from the Bari station's custody and flown to an undisclosed location. No mention of Projekt Steinadler appeared in subsequent OSS or early CIA operational summaries. In the 1960s, during a routine review of declassified wartime intelligence, a single memorandum surfaced referencing the incident. The memo, dated May 14, 1945, noted, Steinadler content potentially damaging to cohesion of Allied post-war narrative. Recommend indefinite suppression. Asterisk, the phrase, cohesion of Allied post-war narrative, has since become a point of fascination among military historians. Accounts from those who claimed to have viewed the footage before its removal are inconsistent. One former Army photo analyst, speaking anonymously in 1979, asserted that the Allied uniformed figures were possibly intelligence plant personnel, liaising for post-surrender tech transfer. Another insisted the uniforms were authentic and the men were real POWs, whose cooperation with German scientists was voluntary, under an arrangement made in the chaotic final days before surrender. Skeptics point out that the Alps in early May 1945 were a patchwork of surrendering units, displaced civilians, and semi-autonomous scientific groups. The Reichenhall area, in particular, hosted multiple underground facilities tied to late-war weapons development. The possibility of joint activity between captured Allied personnel and German scientists, whether sanctioned or improvised, cannot be dismissed outright. In 1991, a retired CIA photographic specialist named Walter M. Hensley told a German investigative journalist that he had been ordered to destroy a duplicate set of the Projekt Steinadler reels in 1952. Hensley claimed the footage's implications were the kind that could end careers and rewrite the surrender. He alleged that certain identifiable individuals in the film went on to prominent positions in both Western aerospace firms and NATO-aligned research programs. The original reels have never been seen by the public. FOIA requests produce the standard response, no records responsive to request. The National Archives lists Projekt Steinadler in its withheld in full annex, with a declassification review date of 2075. In the absence of the footage, debate persists over whether Projekt Steinadler was evidence of covert Allied-German collaboration in the war's final hours, a misinterpreted episode involving repatriated technical experts, or deliberate wartime propaganda. What is certain is that the OSS considered the material so sensitive that it bypassed normal intelligence channels entirely, disappearing into a closed vault from which it has never emerged. The airstrip outside Cezanne has long since returned to farmland, its wartime role erased from local histories. Yet for those aware of the interception, that patch of ground remains tied to a single unanswerable question. Why, in the last days of the war, would German scientists risk flying such film to the coast, and why would its contents be so dangerous that they could never be spoken of again? The truth is not lost, it's locked away, deep in vaults where dust and classified ink weigh more than any verdict. Those who touched it are gone, but their warnings linger in scattered memos and whispered recollections. The files remain sealed, not to protect the innocent, but to keep the rest of us from knowing just how far the world was willing to go, and how close it came to going further.